I'd lived in my apartment for 5 years, and while it wasn't perfect, it was home. The rent was fair, the neighborhood was decent, and I had just enough space for myself and my rescue dog, Benny. Things ran smoothly until a new landlord, Victor, bought the building. From the moment he took over, it was clear he had plans, and those plans didn't involve long-term tenants like me. At first, it was little things: ignoring maintenance requests, letting the hall lights burn out, losing rent receipts. I figured he was just disorganized. Then I heard whispers from my neighbors that he was trying to clear the building for renovations. Renovations that would conveniently allow him to triple the rent for new tenants. Still, I thought I'd be fine. I paid my rent on time every month, and my lease had 6 months left. That illusion shattered when I came home one Friday to find a notice taped to my door. You have 30 days to vacate the premises due to breach of lease. I stood there in disbelief. Breach of lease for what? The notice didn't even specify. I called the number on the paper and got Victor himself. He spoke with the fake cheeriness of someone who knows they're lying. Oh yeah, we've had some. Complaints about noise from your unit. Gotta keep the building peaceful, you understand. I didn't understand because I barely made any noise. I didn't throw parties. Benny barked maybe twice a day, and only at delivery guys. I told him as much, but he just repeated, 30 days, or we'll have to take legal action. Something in me snapped. I knew enough about tenant rights to realize what he was doing wasn't legal. You can't just evict someone without proper cause, and without going through the courts. I decided then and there that I wasn't leaving quietly. The next morning, I started documenting everything. I took photos of the building's deteriorating conditions, the leaky pipes, the mold creeping up the stairwell, the broken fire escape that had been under repair for months. I spoke with neighbors, and they told me Victor had given them similar eviction notices, each with a different bogus reason. It was obvious. He wanted all of us out, and he wasn't going to bother following the law to do it. What Victor didn't know was that I had a cousin who worked in the city's housing department. I called her, explained the situation, and she confirmed my suspicion. He was in violation of multiple tenant protection laws. More importantly, some of the safety issues I'd photographed weren't just inconvenient. They were severe enough to warrant an inspection. I smiled for the first time since the notice appeared. If Victor wanted to play dirty, I was more than ready to play smarter. On Monday morning, I sent my cousin every photo and video I'd taken over the weekend. She told me she'd handle it, but also advised me to keep collecting evidence. The more, the better. That same afternoon, I started knocking on my neighbors' doors with a notebook in hand. At first, they were hesitant. People get scared when a landlord starts threatening eviction. They think keeping quiet will protect them. But once I explained that Victor's actions were illegal and that I was already in contact with housing authorities, the floodgates opened. One neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, from down the hall, told me her kitchen ceiling had been leaking for months, and Victor had told her to just put a bucket under it instead of fixing it. Another, a young couple on the second floor, said they'd been told they had to leave because they didn't keep their place clean enough, which was laughable since their apartment was spotless. By the end of the night, I had statements from almost every tenant in the building, along with photos they'd taken of their own maintenance issues. The mold problem was worse than I'd thought, and one tenant even had pictures of exposed wiring in their bathroom. Meanwhile, Victor started ramping up his intimidation tactics. I'd find my mail accidentally delivered to other units. Random inspectors, clearly his buddies, would show up unannounced, trying to catch me in some supposed lease violation. At one point, he even sent a handyman to remove my apartment door without warning, claiming it needed repairs. That was the last straw. I called my cousin again, and this time she gave me the good news. An official inspection was scheduled for later that week. But she also gave me a warning. Landlords like Victor often try to make problems disappear right before inspectors arrive. I needed to make sure the damage stayed visible until then. So I coordinated with the neighbors. We agreed not to let him in to make any sudden repairs, no matter what excuse he gave. If he tried, we'd film it. If he sent people to harass us, we'd call the police. Sure enough, 2 days before the inspection, Victor showed up with a small crew and buckets of paint. He started knocking on doors, saying he was there to freshen up the walls. But we all knew the fresh paint was meant to cover the mold. When he got to my apartment, I stood in the doorway, blocking him. "Sorry, Victor," I said, holding up my phone so he could see I was recording. "You're not coming in? Any repairs can wait until after the city inspection." His face went red and he stomped away, muttering something about ungrateful tenants. That was when I knew. This inspection was going to be the turning point. The day of the inspection, the building was buzzing. Tenants peeked out of their doors, whispering about whether Victor would try one last stunt. I woke up early, double-checked my phone battery, and laid out all the photos, videos, and written statements in a neat folder. If the city wanted evidence, I was going to give them a mountain. Around 10 a.m., 2 inspectors from the housing department arrived. Clipboards in hand, hard hats tucked under their arms. I greeted them in the lobby, introduced myself, and explained that I was the one who'd filed the complaint. They nodded and asked if they could start with my unit. I led them upstairs, pointing out the warped floorboards, peeling paint, and the persistent damp smell that had been seeping in from the hallway. When we reached the bathroom, one inspector crouched to check the black streaks crawling up the wall. "That's definitely mold," she said flatly, jotting notes. As they moved on to the other units, I tagged along to translate tenant complaints into specific, documentable issues. Mrs. Thompson showed them her ceiling leak, which had gotten worse overnight, and the inspectors took multiple photos. The young couple on the second floor led them straight to the exposed wiring in their bathroom, which one inspector said was a clear safety hazard. Halfway through the walkthrough, Victor finally appeared. He put on his best fake smile, greeting the inspectors like old friends. "Welcome, welcome." I was just about to get these repairs handled. You know how it is. Small buildings need a little extra love. The inspectors didn't buy it. One of them told him, in a clipped tone, that repairs should have been done months ago, and that certain violations like the wiring were dangerous enough to require immediate correction or tenant relocation. Victor's smile faltered. He tried to shift the blame onto us, saying tenants refused repairs or created the mess themselves. That's when I stepped in. "Actually," I said, handing over my folder, "here's a record of every time tenants requested repairs, along with photos of the conditions over the past year. You'll notice these issues predate any supposed refusals." The inspectors took the folder, flipping through page after page of documented neglect. I saw one of them glance at Victor with an expression that said, "You're in trouble." By the end of the inspection, they had a laundry list of violations, structural, electrical, and health-related. They informed Victor that the building would be cited and that he had 2 options: fund emergency repairs and temporary accommodations for tenants, or face a full shutdown order. Victor's jaw tightened. "You can't do that," he snapped. "This is my property." The lead inspector didn't even blink. "And you're responsible for keeping it safe and habitable. You failed on both counts. Expect our official notice within 48 hours. As they left, I caught Victor glaring at me. But instead of fear, I felt a surge of satisfaction. The power was finally shifting. 2 days later, the notice was taped to the front entrance in big, bold letters: "Building condemned. Unsafe for occupancy." The paper flapped in the breeze like a victory flag. Tenants gathered in the lobby, murmuring in disbelief. Some were smiling, others looked worried about where they'd stay. But the overwhelming mood was relief. Victor had finally been caught. The city ordered everyone to vacate within a week, with temporary housing vouchers provided to each tenant. It wasn't perfect. Moving on short notice is stressful, but it meant we were finally free from Victor's neglect. I had already started helping Mrs. Thompson fill out her voucher forms, while my neighbor upstairs searched listings on her phone. Victor, on the other hand, was in full meltdown mode. I caught sight of him pacing the sidewalk, phone glued to his ear, yelling about lawyers and unfair treatment. At one point, he stormed inside and started ripping down the condemnation notices, only for a city officer to show up minutes later and tape them back up. Right in front of him, that evening, I got a knock on my door. It was Victor. His face was red and his voice was icy. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "You've ruined my livelihood." I kept my tone calm. "You ruined it yourself. You could have done the repairs. You didn't. The city's just holding you accountable." He sneered, muttered something under his breath, and stormed off. I locked the door and went back to packing my boxes. I wasn't going to let him rattle me. Over the next few days, the building became a revolving door of inspectors, contractors taking notes, and reporters sniffing around for a story. Word had spread, and the local news even covered the shutdown, interviewing a few tenants, including me. I made sure to be factual, sticking to the unsafe living conditions and the city's findings. No exaggeration needed. The truth was damning enough. When the segment aired, I heard Victor's name mentioned alongside multiple code violations and potential legal action. That night, my phone buzzed with texts from friends who had seen the piece, congratulating me for standing up for what was right. The final blow came when the city posted an updated notice. Not only was the building shut down, but Victor was barred from renting out any property in the city until all violations were cleared and fines paid, a process that could take months, if not years. On the last day, as tenants rolled out their suitcases and moving vans pulled away, I stood on the sidewalk and took one last look at the old brick facade. It had been a miserable place to live at times, but it was also where we'd all come together, fought back, and won. Victor avoided eye contact as he shuffled inside, no doubt facing the reality that his cash cow had just turned into a legal nightmare. And for the first time in months, I walked away without feeling powerless. A few weeks after the building was shut down, life felt surreal. I was living in a temporary apartment provided by the city's housing program. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, warm, and most importantly, safe. No more constant leaks, no rats scurrying in the walls, no threats taped to my door. I could finally sleep without listening for the sound of something breaking. The former tenants had scattered across the city, but we stayed in touch through a group chat. Mrs. Thompson moved in with her daughter. The young couple from 2B found a small house to rent. Even Greg, who had been the most skeptical about filing complaints, admitted he was happier now than he'd been in years. We'd all lost our homes, but in a way we'd gained a community. One afternoon, I got a call from the city housing office. The inspector who'd handled our case wanted to meet in person to give an update. I met him at a nearby coffee shop, where he explained that Victor's case had escalated. Not only was he facing tens of thousands in fines, but the city's attorney was pushing for criminal charges for willful neglect of tenant safety. Apparently, the evidence we provided, especially my detailed log of repairs left undone, along with photos and videos, had been crucial. The inspector even told me, honestly, without your documentation, this might have taken a lot longer. You saved people from living in a dangerous situation. That was the first time it hit me just how far this had gone. What started as a fight to keep my apartment had turned into something that might change how Victor operated forever, if he was even allowed to keep operating at all. A few days later, I ran into Victor by pure chance. I was leaving the grocery store when I spotted him in the parking lot.
He looked thinner, older.
The smug arrogance was gone. He glanced at me, recognition flickering in his eyes, then quickly looked away. He didn't say a word.
Nice.
That silence was more satisfying than any argument we'd ever had. Months passed, and eventually, word got around that Victor had been banned from owning or managing rental properties in the city for at least 5 years. His building remained vacant, the windows boarded up. Every time I passed it on the bus, I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing it wasn't swallowing up anyone else's rent while falling apart inside. The best part? The tenants from our old building still met once a month for coffee. We'd laugh, share updates, and sometimes joke about starting our own rental company. One where the heat actually works, Greg would say. Victor had tried to bully us into silence, but instead we spoke louder than ever. And in the end, the building didn't just get shut down, so did his whole operation.